I should have known something was off the moment Victor handed me the keys. Not because of anything he said or did, but because of what he didn't say. No explanation about the reservation mix-up, no apologetic shrug about the hotel being fully booked. Just those silver keys pressed into my palm with a look I couldn't quite read. The motel sits at the edge of a small town I'd never heard of before this morning, all faded brick and flickering neon signs that spell out words like vacancy in letters that have seen better decades. The parking lot is mostly empty except for a few cars that look like they've been there since the place opened. Victor's sedan looks out of place here, too clean, too expensive for a roadside stop that charges by the night rather than the experience. I follow him up the concrete steps to room 237, my backpack cutting into my shoulders with each step. The weight of it reminds me that this was supposed to be simple. 2 days away from the office, Victor covering the hotel, me finally getting some real training on the client accounts that matter. A chance to prove myself beyond filing reports and making copies. A chance to show him I belong in meetings that don't happen in the break room. But now, standing behind him as he slides the key card through the reader, I feel something shift in the space between us. Maybe it's the distance from the office, or the way his shoulders have relaxed since we left the city limits. Maybe it's the fact that we've been alone in his car for 3 hours, talking about everything except work, and I've started to notice things I shouldn't. The way he drums his fingers against the steering wheel when he's thinking. The way his voice gets softer when he's not trying to be my boss. The door clicks open, and immediately I smell it. That particular scent that belongs only to places like this. Industrial detergent mixed with something that might be dust or might be the accumulated weight of 1,000 temporary stays. It's not unpleasant, exactly, but it's honest in a way that makes me conscious of how far we are from anything familiar. Victor steps inside first, and I hear his footsteps stop. When I follow him into the room, I understand why. There's only one bed. It sits in the center of the small space like an accusation, queen-sized and covered in a thin comforter the color of coffee with too much cream. The headboard is bolted to the wall, practical rather than decorative, and the whole thing takes up most of the room's real estate. There's a small table by the window, 2 chairs that have seen better years, and a television mounted high on the wall that probably gets 3 channels on a good day. I stand there in the doorway, my backpack still cutting into my shoulders, trying to process what this means. Victor tosses his jacket onto one of the chairs with the kind of casual confidence that makes me wonder if he's as surprised as I am, or if some part of him expected this. He turns around, and there's something in his expression I've never seen before. Not the controlled professionalism he wears in the office, not the focused intensity he brings to client calls. Something looser, more uncertain. His dark hair is slightly messed from running his hand through it during the drive, and without his usual pressed shirt and tie, he looks younger. More like someone I might have known in college, less like someone who signs my timesheets. Only one bed, he says, and his voice carries a note I can't identify. Amusement, maybe, or resignation. He's looking at the bed when he says it, not at me, and I wonder what he sees there that I don't. I should say something. Offer to call the front desk, or suggest we find another motel, or volunteer to sleep on the floor. All reasonable responses from a responsible employee who understands boundaries and professional conduct. But the words stick somewhere in my throat because there's something about the way he's standing there, hands in his pockets, that makes me think he's waiting for me to make the first move. You want a middle spot? The question comes out quieter than his previous comment, and this time he does look at me. His eyes are the same dark brown they've always been, but in the strange amber light filtering through the motel's curtains, they seem to hold something I've never noticed before. The question itself should be a joke. Should be the kind of thing we laugh off before one of us inevitably takes the floor or suggests driving home tonight instead of staying. But neither of us laughs. The silence stretches between us, filling up the small space like water rising in a closed room. I can hear the hum of the air conditioning unit beneath the window, the distant sound of traffic on the highway, the muffled voices of other guests somewhere down the hall. Normal sounds that should ground me, remind me where I am and who I'm with and why this whole situation is a problem that needs solving. Instead, I find myself looking at the bed again, really looking at it. It's not huge, but it's not small either. Big enough for two people who don't mind sharing space. Big enough for two people who trust each other not to cross lines that shouldn't be crossed. I realize I'm still standing in the doorway, still wearing my backpack like armor, still frozen somewhere between stepping forward and stepping back. Victor has moved away from the bed, over to the window, and he's looking out at the parking lot with his hands still in his pockets. His shoulders are tense now in a way they weren't in the car, and I wonder if he's regretting whatever impulse led him to make that joke about the middle spot. Because it was a joke, wasn't it? It had to be. Victor is my boss, 3 years older than me, confident in ways I'm still learning to fake. He's the one who hired me 6 months ago when I was still stumbling through interviews, the one who patiently explains things I should probably already know, the one who somehow makes even constructive criticism feel like encouragement. He's professional and appropriate, and exactly the kind of person who would never put either of us in a position that could complicate things. Except here we are. I finally let my backpack slide off my shoulders, setting it down by the door with more care than it requires. The small action feels significant, like I'm committing to staying, to making this work somehow. Victor glances over at the sound, and for just a moment, our eyes meet across the small room. There's something in that look that makes my chest tight. Not uncomfortable, exactly, but aware. Aware of the space between us, aware of the bed that dominates the room, aware of how different this feels from every interaction we've had in the fluorescent-lit safety of the office. I should ask about the training schedule for tomorrow. Should suggest we grab dinner and go over the client files. Should do something, anything to restore the familiar dynamic that makes sense, that keeps everything in its proper place. Instead, I hear myself asking if he thinks they have room service. He smiles at that, a real smile that reaches his eyes, and some of the tension in the room shifts. Not disappears, but transforms into something else. Something that feels less like a problem and more like a possibility I don't know how to name. The diner down the road serves coffee that tastes like it was brewed sometime last week, but Victor orders a second cup anyway. We sit across from each other in a booth with cracked vinyl seats, the client files spread between us like a buffer zone. This was supposed to be the professional part of the evening, the reason we're here, the thing that justifies the company paying for gas and meals, and a motel room that we're both pretending isn't a complication. I've been working for Victor for 6 months, but I'm still learning the rhythm of being his employee. Still figuring out when to speak up in meetings and when to just listen, still second-guessing myself every time I send him an email or knock on his office door. The job itself isn't complicated. I'm good with numbers, good with details, good at the kind of methodical work that keeps everything running smoothly behind the scenes. But Victor makes it feel like more than just filing in spreadsheets. He has this way of explaining things that makes me feel smarter than I probably am. When he reviews my work, he doesn't just point out mistakes. He shows me why something matters, how it connects to the bigger picture, what it means for the client's long-term success. In meetings with the senior staff, he mentions my contributions in ways that make me sound more experienced than I am, more valuable than my salary suggests. At the office, he's exactly what you'd want in a boss. Fair, but demanding, patient with questions, but impatient with excuses. He wears his authority easily, the way some people wear well-tailored suits. Natural, unforced, impossible to ignore. When he walks into a room, conversations shift to accommodate his presence. When he speaks, people listen not because they have to, but because they want to hear what he'll say. But here, in this diner that smells like grease and disinfectant, something is different. He's still talking about client expectations and quarterly projections, still reviewing the agenda for tomorrow's meetings. But his voice is softer somehow, less formal. He leans back in the booth instead of sitting straight, lets his sentences trail off instead of ending them with the decisive period that marks most of his professional communications. Maybe it's the distance from the office, or the fact that we're the only customers in a place that probably sees most of its business from long-haul truckers and people passing through. Maybe it's the way the fluorescent lights flicker occasionally, creating these small pockets of shadow that make ordinary conversation feel more intimate than it should. Or maybe it's the bed we're both avoiding talking about. He tells me about the client we're meeting tomorrow, a manufacturing company that's been struggling with inventory management. The owner is old school, Victor explains, the kind of person who still does half his business with handshake deals and gut instincts. He's skeptical of outside consultants, especially young ones, but the numbers don't lie. He needs help or he'll be closing doors within 2 years. This is why Victor brought me, he says, because I'm good with the details, good at presenting information in ways that don't feel threatening. Because I listen more than I talk, and sometimes that's exactly what nervous clients need. The compliment catches me off guard, the way his compliments always do. Not because they're unexpected. Victor has never been stingy with positive feedback when it's earned, but because of the way he delivers them. Like they're facts rather than opinions, observations rather than encouragement. Like he sees something in me that I'm still trying to find myself. We finish dinner as the sun disappears behind the low buildings that make up this town's version of a downtown. The walk back to the motel is quiet, both of us carrying folders and the weight of tomorrow's responsibilities. But underneath the comfortable silence of colleagues preparing for a workday, there's something else. An awareness that we're walking back to a room with one bed, to a night that will require decisions neither of us has had to make before. Victor unlocks the door and holds it open for me, a gesture that should feel automatic but somehow doesn't. Inside, the room looks exactly the same as when we left it, bed still dominating the space, our luggage claiming opposite corners like territorial markers. But the evening light has changed everything else. The harsh afternoon sun has been replaced by the softer glow of street lamps filtering through thin curtains, casting everything in shades of amber and shadow. I watch Victor move around the small space, hanging his jacket in the narrow closet, checking his phone for messages, organizing tomorrow's materials on the small table by the window. These are normal actions, the kind of routine business travelers perform in hotel rooms across the country every night. But there's something different about the way he moves now, a careful deliberateness that suggests he's as aware as I am of how this ordinary evening has taken on unexpected weight. He suggests we review the presentation one more time before bed, and I agree because it seems like the right thing to do, the professional thing. We sit on opposite sides of the small table, laptops open, going through slides we've both seen a dozen times. But I find myself watching his hands as he gestures toward the screen, noticing the way his voice drops slightly when he's concentrating, cataloging details I've never paid attention to before. When we finally close the laptops and acknowledge that we're as prepared as we're going to be, the room falls into a different kind of quiet. Not the comfortable silence of a walk back from dinner, but something more charged, more aware. The bed seems larger now, somehow, more present, impossible to ignore even though we're both making a careful effort not to look directly at it. Victor stands first, stretching in a way that makes his shirt ride up slightly, revealing a strip of skin above his belt. It's such a small thing, so ordinary, but in the context of this room, this night, this strange space we found ourselves occupying, it feels significant in ways I don't know how to process. We both stand there for a moment, laptops closed, work officially finished, the elephant in the room growing larger by the second. Victor runs his hand through his hair, that gesture I've started to recognize as his thinking tell, and finally breaks the silence with something that sounds almost like normalcy. I don't mind sharing, he says, his voice carrying that same casual tone he used earlier when he tossed his jacket on the chair. Like this is just another logistics problem to solve, another item to check off the list before we can move on to more important things. But there's something underneath the casualness, something that makes the words feel heavier than they should. I hear myself stammering about taking the floor, about not wanting to impose, about how I'm used to sleeping anywhere from my college days. The words tumble out too fast, revealing exactly how not casual this feels to me, how aware I am of every possible implication. Victor watches me stumble through the explanation with something that might be amusement, or might be patience, or might be something else entirely. He cuts through my rambling with a shake of his head. "Don't be ridiculous," he says. "It's a big bed. We're both adults. And that should be the end of it. Problem solved, boundaries established, Everyone acting like reasonable professionals who can handle an awkward situation without making it weird. But something about the way he says adults makes my chest tighten, makes me hyper-aware of the space between us and the fact that we're about to spend the next 8 hours sharing something more intimate than a conference room or a company car. We take turns in the bathroom, brushing teeth, and changing clothes with the kind of careful politeness people use when they're trying not to acknowledge how strained a situation has become. I change into a t-shirt and shorts that suddenly feel too thin, too revealing, even though they're the same things I've slept in for years. When Victor emerges in similar clothes, dark t-shirt, gray shorts that show more of his legs than I've ever seen, I have to force myself not to stare. The bed feels enormous and impossibly small at the same time. We approach it from opposite sides like we're following some unspoken choreography, each of us claiming our territory with careful precision. Victor takes the side by the window, I take the side by the door. We slip under the covers with our backs turned toward each other, maintaining as much distance as the mattress allows. The sheets smell like industrial detergent, and that particular nowhere scent of places designed for temporary occupancy. But underneath that, I can detect something else, something warmer, more human. Victor's shampoo, maybe, or the fabric softener he uses on his clothes. It's not unpleasant. It's actually quite the opposite, which is exactly the problem. I'll lie there in the dark, listening to him settle into the mattress beside me, hyper-aware of every sound, every shift in weight, every breath. The air conditioning hums its steady rhythm, and somewhere down the hall a door closes with a soft thud. Normal sounds of a normal night in a normal motel, but nothing about this feels normal anymore. Victor shifts slightly, the mattress dipping just enough that I can feel the movement travel across the space between us. I hold my breath, waiting for him to settle, but instead he shifts again, and this time his arm brushes against my back as he adjusts his position. He doesn't move it right away. It's the smallest possible contact, just the weight of his forearm resting lightly against my shoulder blade through my t-shirt. But in the charged silence of this room, this night, this strange space we found ourselves occupying, it feels monumental, like a question being asked without words, like a door being opened just a crack to see what might happen next. I should move away, should shift toward my edge of the bed, re-establish the careful distance we started with, pretend this accidental contact is exactly that accidental, meaningless, easily corrected. But I don't move. Instead, I lie perfectly still, barely breathing, cataloging the warmth spreading from that single point of contact across my entire body. Minutes pass, or maybe hours. Time feels suspended in this small pocket of darkness, measured only by the steady rhythm of our breathing and the occasional sound of traffic passing on the distant highway. Victor's arm remains where it is, no longer accidental, no longer something that can be explained away as the natural consequence of sharing space. When he finally does move, it's not to pull away. Instead, he shifts closer, just slightly, just enough that I can feel the heat radiating from his body across the narrow space between us. Not touching exactly, but close enough that I'm aware of every breath he takes, every small movement he makes. My pulse is racing now, my body hyper-alert to his presence in ways that feel both thrilling and terrifying. This is my boss lying next to me. This is Victor, who signs my paychecks and writes my performance reviews and trusts me with client information that could make or break deals worth more than I make in a year. This is the man who has been nothing but professional and appropriate and completely correct in every interaction we've had since the day he hired me. But here, in this bed, in this darkness that makes everything feel possible and impossible at the same time, he doesn't feel like my boss. He feels like something else entirely, something I don't have words for yet, but can sense with every nerve ending in my body. The invitation is silent, unspoken, communicated entirely through the language of proximity and breath, and the careful way he's not moving away. It hangs in the air between us like a question waiting for an answer, like a door that's been opened just wide enough to see what lies beyond. I close my eyes and try to will myself to sleep, but every cell in my body is awake, alive, attuned to the man lying beside me in the dark. Morning arrives with the harsh buzz of Victor's phone alarm, cutting through whatever fragile thing had been building in the darkness between us. We spring apart, like guilty teenagers, suddenly occupying opposite edges of the mattress with the kind of careful distance that makes last night feel like something I might have imagined. But I didn't imagine it. The memory of his arm against my back, the weight of his presence beside me, the way he shifted closer instead of away, all of it sits heavy in my chest as we navigate the awkward choreography of sharing a bathroom and getting dressed for the day ahead. Victor emerges from the bathroom in his usual armor of pressed shirt and dark slacks, every trace of last night's softness carefully erased. He's back to being my boss, checking his phone for messages, reviewing our schedule over coffee that tastes marginally better than last night's diner brew. But there are small cracks in the facade, the way his eyes linger when he thinks I'm not looking, the way his voice carries a new warmth when he says my name. The client meeting goes better than expected. Mr. Henley, the manufacturing company owner, is exactly as Victor described. Skeptical of consultants, suspicious of anyone under 40, convinced that computers will never replace good, old-fashioned intuition. But Victor handles him with the kind of patient expertise that reminds me why he's so good at this job. He speaks Henley's language, frames our recommendations in terms of practical solutions rather than theoretical improvements. I watch him work, taking notes and managing the technical presentation while he focuses on the relationship building. This is what I'm supposed to be learning. Not just the mechanics of our business, but the art of reading people, of knowing when to push and when to listen, of making complex problems feel manageable. But today I'm distracted by other things. The way Victor's hand moves when he gestures toward the charts I've prepared. The way he includes me in the conversation, making sure Henley understands that we're a team, that my ideas matter as much as his experience. The way he stands just slightly closer to me than usual when we're both looking at the same document. After the meeting, we grab lunch at a small cafe downtown. The conversation should be about work, analyzing what went well, planning our follow-up strategy, discussing the timeline for implementation. And is about those things mostly, but underneath the professional debrief, there's something else happening. A new awareness of each other that makes ordinary interactions feel charged with possibility. Victor compliments my presentation skills, tells me I handled Henley's questions perfectly. The praise shouldn't feel different from any other feedback he's given me over the past 6 months, but it does. Maybe it's the way he looks at me when he says it, or the way his knee brushes against mine under the small table. Small things that could be accidental, except they don't feel accidental anymore. We spend the afternoon visiting another potential client, going through the same routine of assessment and recommendation. But I catch Victor watching me during moments when he thinks I'm focused on something else. When I turn to ask him a question, he's already looking at me with an expression I can't quite read, something between professional assessment and personal interest. The day stretches on with its careful dance of business and unspoken awareness. We drive to 3 different locations, review contracts and financial statements, take notes on everything from inventory systems to employee scheduling. Normal work, the kind of thing we do every day back at the office. But here, in the contained space of his car, in these unfamiliar locations where we're temporarily removed from the usual hierarchy and routine, everything feels different. Victor makes jokes that are funnier than they should be. I find myself laughing more easily, contributing to conversations with a confidence I usually have to work to summon. The professional distance that normally exists between us, appropriate, necessary, carefully maintained, starts to feel less like protection and more like an obstacle. As evening approaches and we head back toward the motel, the atmosphere in the car grows thick with anticipation. We both know what's waiting for us. The same room, the same bed, the same charged space where professional boundaries dissolved into something much more complicated. Victor turns on the radio, filling the silence with soft music that does nothing to ease the tension building between us. I watch the landscape pass by the passenger window, fields and small towns and highway signs that mark our progress back toward whatever is going to happen next. When we finally pull into the motel parking lot, Victor turns off the engine but doesn't immediately get out. We sit there in the gathering dusk, both of us staring straight ahead, both of us aware that we're about to cross back into territory that belongs to night and darkness and the intimate space of a shared bed. "Don't hog the blanket, rookie," he says finally, his voice carrying that same teasing tone from last night's middle spot comment. But this time, when he looks at me, there's no ambiguity in his expression. No pretense that this is just a joke between colleagues who happen to be sharing sleeping arrangements. This time, I can see exactly what he means and exactly what he's hoping I'll understand. The invitation is there again, unspoken but unmistakable. And as we finally get out of the car and walk toward room 237, I realize that tonight I might actually be ready to accept it. The second night feels different from the moment we step back into the room. The careful choreography from yesterday, the polite taking of turns, the deliberate distance, the pretense that sharing a bed is just a practical matter between colleagues, has been replaced by something more honest, more inevitable. We don't bother with the elaborate dance of claiming opposite sides of the room. Victor hangs his jacket on the chair and starts unbuttoning his shirt while I'm still closing the door behind us. Not in a rush, not with any sense of urgency, but with the kind of natural ease that suggests we've already moved past the stage where we pretend this is purely circumstantial. I watch him move around the small space, noting how he shed the careful formality that marked our first night here. His movements are looser now, more relaxed, like he's stopped holding himself in check. When he catches me watching, he doesn't look away the way he might have yesterday. Instead, he holds my gaze for a moment longer than necessary, and something passes between us that feels like acknowledgement. We go through the motions of preparing for bed, changing clothes, brushing teeth, setting phones to charge, but the atmosphere is charged with anticipation rather than awkwardness. When I emerge from the bathroom in my t-shirt and shorts, Victor is already under the covers, but he's not turned away toward the window like last night. Instead, he's lying on his back, one arm behind his head, looking directly at me. "Come here," he says softly, and it's not quite a command, but it's not quite a request either. It's something in between, something that acknowledges the choice I'm about to make, while making it clear what he hopes that choice will be. I cross the small space between the bathroom and the bed, hyper-aware of every step, every breath, every beat of my heart against my ribs. When I reach my side of the mattress, I don't immediately get under the covers. Instead, I sit on the edge, looking down at him in the amber light filtering through the curtains. This is the moment where I could still step back, still restore the professional distance that should exist between us. I could make some joke about being tired, could turn away and claim my edge of the bed and spend another night lying rigid beside him, pretending the electricity between us doesn't exist. But I don't want to pretend anymore. You don't do this with everyone you train, right? The question comes out as barely more than a whisper, but in the quiet of the room it sounds loud enough to shatter something fragile. Victor's expression shifts, becomes more serious, more focused. He turns onto his side, propping his head up with his hand so he can look at me directly. For a long moment, he doesn't answer, just studies my face like he's trying to read something written there in a language he's still learning. "No," he says finally, his voice carrying a weight that makes the single syllable feel like a complete confession. "Just you." The admission hangs between us like a bridge I can choose to cross or burn down. It's not just about tonight, about this bed, about the circumstance that brought us here. It's about everything that's been building between us for months without either of us acknowledging it. It's about the way he looks at me during meetings, the way he finds excuses to review my work in person instead of sending emails, the way his hand lingers when he passes me documents. It's about the way I've started paying attention to when he arrives at the office each morning, the way I volunteer for projects that will put me in closer contact with him, the way I've begun measuring my own competence against his approval rather than any objective standard. "Just you," he says again, and this time there's something almost vulnerable in the way he says it. Like he's admitting to something he shouldn't want, something that complicates everything we've carefully built in our professional relationship. I should ask what this means for Monday morning, for the office, for the careful hierarchy that governs our daily interactions. I should think about performance reviews and company policies and all the very good reasons why sleeping with your boss is exactly the kind of mistake that ruins careers and destroys the trust that makes good working relationships possible. But in this room, in this moment, with Victor looking at me, like I'm something he's been wanting for longer than either of us has been willing to admit, none of those concerns feel as important as the truth hanging in the air between us. The truth that this isn't just circumstance or convenience or the strange intimacy that comes from being away from familiar places. The truth that whatever this is, it's been building for months, threading itself through every professional interaction, every casual conversation, every moment when our eyes met across a conference table and held just a beat longer than necessary. The truth that he chose me for this trip, chose to bring me into this situation where the careful boundaries between us would be tested, because some part of him wanted to see what would happen when those boundaries began to blur. I reach for the covers, finally slipping beneath them, but I don't turn away. Instead, I move closer to the center of the bed, closer to him, until there's only a few inches of space between us. Close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough to see the way his breathing has changed, become more careful, more controlled. In the stillness that follows, I realize the truth I've been circling around for months, the understanding that's been growing despite my best efforts to ignore it. This isn't just circumstance. It never was. It's choice. His choice to bring me here, my choice to stay, our shared choice to stop pretending that what's happening between us is anything other than exactly what we both want it to be. The space between us becomes charged with something that feels both inevitable and terrifying. Victor's eyes search my face in the dim light, reading something there that makes his expression soften into something I've never seen before. Not the confident boss who commands respect in every meeting, not the patient mentor who guides me through complex problems. Something raw and unguarded that makes my breath catch in my throat. He reaches up slowly, his fingertips barely grazing my cheek, like he's testing the boundaries of this new territory we've entered. The touch is so light it could be accidental, but there's nothing accidental about the way he's looking at me, the way his thumb traces the line of my jaw with deliberate precision. "You can roll over if you want me to stop," he whispers, his voice rough with something that might be desire or might be uncertainty. The words hang in the darkness between us like a lifeline I can choose to grab or let drift away. But I don't want him to stop. I don't want to roll over, don't want to retreat to the safety of my edge of the bed, don't want to pretend that the electricity crackling between us is anything other than exactly what it feels like. Instead, I shift closer, closing the last few inches of distance until my forehead is almost touching his shoulder. The decision feels monumental and simple at the same time. Like stepping off a cliff I've been standing at the edge of for months. Like finally admitting to something I've known all along but was too afraid to name. When I move closer instead of away, Victor's sharp intake of breath tells me everything I need to know about how much this moment means to him too. His hand moves from my cheek to the back of my neck, fingers threading through my hair with a tenderness that makes my chest tight. We're close enough now that I can feel his breath against my skin, can smell the faint scent of his shampoo mixed with something distinctly him. Close enough that when he speaks, his words brush against my ear like a confession. "I've been thinking about this for weeks," he says, so quietly I almost don't hear him. "About you. About what it would be like to stop pretending I don't notice the way you look at me during meetings." The admission makes something in my chest flutter and settle at the same time. All those moments I thought I was imagining, all those glances that lasted a beat too long, all those times I convinced myself I was reading too much into casual interactions. Apparently, I wasn't imagining anything at all. "Me too," I managed to whisper back, and the words feel like jumping off that cliff, like free falling into something I can't control or predict or take back once it started. Victor pulls back just enough to look at me, his eyes dark and serious in the amber light. There's something in his expression that looks almost like relief, like he's been carrying the weight of this secret longer than I realized. When he speaks again, his voice carries a vulnerability I've never heard before. "I know this complicates everything," he says. "I know it changes things between us in ways we probably haven't thought through yet. But I can't keep pretending I don't want this. Neither can I tell him, and the honesty feels like shedding armor I didn't realize I was wearing. That's when he leans in, finally closing the last bit of distance between us. His lips touch mine softly at first, tentative, like he's still giving me a chance to change my mind. But when I respond, when I press closer instead of pulling away, the kiss deepens into something that feels like months of restrained want finally being allowed to surface. It's nothing like I imagined it would be, and everything like I hoped it might be. Slow and certain and full of something that feels larger than desire, more significant than attraction. When his tongue traces the line of my lower lip, I open for him instinctively, and the small sound he makes in response sends heat flooding through my entire body. My hands find the soft cotton of his t-shirt, fingers curling into the fabric like I'm anchoring myself to something solid in a world that's suddenly shifted beneath me. Victor's arm slides around my waist, pulling me closer until there's no space left between us, until I can feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against my chest. This is what I've been wanting without knowing how to name it. What I've been circling around in every interaction we've had for months. Not just the physical attraction, though that's certainly part of it, but something deeper. The way he makes me feel capable and valued. The way he sees potential in me that I'm still learning to see in myself. The way being near him makes even ordinary moments feel charged with possibility. When we finally break apart, both of us breathing harder than we were before, Victor rests his forehead against mine. His hand is still tangled in my hair, his thumb tracing small circles at the base of my skull that make it difficult to think about anything other than the way his touch feels against my skin. The line between boss and employee doesn't just blur in this moment. It dissolves completely, replaced by something rawer and more honest. Something that has nothing to do with performance reviews or company hierarchy, and everything to do with the way he's looking at me like I'm something precious he's been afraid to reach for. In the quiet that follows, I understand that we've crossed a threshold neither of us can uncross. Tomorrow there will be questions to answer, boundaries to renegotiate, complications to navigate. But tonight, in this bed, in this charged space where professional distance has given way to something infinitely more dangerous and necessary, all of that feels like a problem for daylight. Tonight, there's only this. The weight of his arm around my waist, the taste of him still lingering on my lips, and the quiet certainty that whatever we've just started, neither of us wants it to end. I wake to the sound of morning light filtering through thin curtains, but for the first time in 2 days, I don't feel the jarring disconnect between sleep and consciousness. Instead, there's a warm weight against my chest, the steady rhythm of breathing that isn't my own, and the gradual awareness that sometime during the night, we rearranged ourselves into something that looks suspiciously like contentment. Victor's head rests against my shoulder, his dark hair falling across his forehead in a way that makes him look younger, softer than the composed professional I see in conference rooms. His arm is draped across my waist with a casual possessiveness that should probably concern me, but instead feels like the most natural thing in the world. The sheets are tangled around our legs, evidence of a night spent not carefully maintaining distance, but slowly gravitating toward each other. For a moment, I lie perfectly still, cataloging the details of this new reality. The way his breath feels warm against my collarbone. The weight of his hand where it rests against my ribs. The fact that neither of us is pretending to be asleep, though neither of us has opened our eyes yet either. There's something peaceful about this liminal space between night and day, between what happened in the darkness and whatever comes next. Outside, I can hear the distant sounds of a motel morning. Doors closing, engines starting, the mundane business of other travelers moving on to their next destinations. But here, in this room that has become its own small universe over the past 2 days, time feels suspended, like we exist in a pocket outside the normal rules of Monday morning meetings and performance reviews and all the very practical concerns that will reassert themselves the moment we check out. Victor shifts slightly, and I feel him come awake gradually, his breathing changing pattern as consciousness returns. But he doesn't pull away immediately, doesn't spring into the careful distance that marked our first morning here. Instead, he settles more comfortably against me, like this is exactly where he intended to be when he woke up. "Did you sleep okay?" he asks eventually, his voice rough with sleep and muffled against my shoulder. It's such an ordinary question, the kind of polite inquiry people make about hotel accommodations and unfamiliar beds. But there's something underneath it, something that sounds like he's really asking whether I have any regrets about where we ended up. "Better than I have in weeks," I tell him, and it's true in ways that have nothing to do with the quality of the mattress or the temperature of the room. He lifts his head then, finally looking at me directly, and I can see him searching my expression for signs of mourning after uncertainty or professional panic. What he finds there must reassure him, because his mouth curves into something that isn't quite a smile, but is warmer than his usual composed expression. "Good," he says simply, and then he settles back down, this time shifting so that we're lying face to face, close enough that I can see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. Close enough that when he speaks, I can feel his words against my lips. "We should probably talk about what this means," he says, but there's no urgency in his voice, no sense that he's eager to rush back into the complications of hierarchy and workplace policies. If anything, he sounds like someone who would be perfectly content to postpone those conversations indefinitely. Probably, I agree, but I don't move to create the kind of distance that serious conversations usually require. Instead, I let my fingers trace the line of his jaw, marveling at how different this feels from every other interaction we've had. Not better or worse necessarily, but honest in a way that professional politeness never allows. The thing is, I don't want to think about Monday morning yet. Don't want to consider how we'll navigate the office dynamic, or whether we'll be able to maintain appropriate boundaries during client meetings, or what happens if someone notices that something fundamental has shifted between us. All of those are important questions that deserve thoughtful answers, but they belong to a different world than this one. Here, in this bed that has become the epicenter of something I'm still learning how to name, the only thing that matters is the way Victor looks at me like I'm something precious he's been waiting to find. The way his hand moves to cover mine where it rests against his chest. The way this feels both completely new and like something we've been building toward for months without realizing it. "Maybe we don't figure it all out today," I say eventually, and Victor nods like this is exactly what he was hoping I would say. "Maybe we just see what happens," he agrees. And then he's kissing me again, soft and unhurried and full of promises I don't think either of us is ready to articulate yet. Outside, the world continues its relentless forward motion. Checkout time approaches, client calls need to be returned. The normal rhythm of professional obligations waits to reclaim us. But for now, in this quiet space between what was and what might be, we exist in a pocket of possibility where the only rules are the ones we write ourselves. When we finally do untangle ourselves from the sheets and each other, when we pack our bags and load the car and begin the drive back toward the city and everything it represents, we carry this with us. This knowledge of what it feels like to wake up in each other's arms, to exist without pretense or professional distance, to admit that what's been building between us was always more than circumstance. The motel room door closes behind us with a soft click, but what happened here doesn't stay here. It travels with us, woven into the fabric of everything that comes next, a quiet revolution disguised as a business trip that changed everything and nothing at all.